Tonight, the future of Georgia is front and center. It is the race for governor. I'm Cheryl Preheim here with Ron Jones as we get ready to hear about issues that matter most to you. Affordability, top of the list. Immigration, health care, public safety, among other things. 3 Democratic candidates will be joining us tonight to talk about those issues and make their case why they think they should be in the governor's office.
Absolutely. And Cheryl, I had an opportunity to head out there in Metro Atlanta on the streets, talk with some of those potential voters. And I asked them, hey, listen, if you are in that debate room, if you can ask those candidates questions, what would be top of mind for you? So there's a couple of them. I'll call them the big C's. Crime and cost of living. We're going to hear from them in a couple of minutes. But Cheryl, when I look at this debate that's coming up here in the next less than a half hour, I see it like a playoff game, you know, like a sporting event. They have to make their way through the playoffs to become that front runner to actually representing the Democratic side before they take on the Republicans.
All right, let's talk about who's going to be in studio with us tonight. We'll have 3 Democratic candidates for governor as selected through criteria through a nonpartisan Emerson poll, the top 3 polling candidates joining us tonight. And the top of that list is former Atlanta mayor and former senior advisor in the Biden administration, Keisha Lance Bottoms, perhaps the person with the most name recognition in this race for governor. We're also going to have former Georgia Labor Commissioner and DeKalb County CEO Michael Thurmond will be here as well, and former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who served as a Republican under Brian Kemp in the first term as the 3rd now Democratic candidate for governor.
And we're going to have a couple of strategists, one representing the Republican side, the other one on the Democratic side, and Spyro Amber, he's a Republican strategist, and also Fred Hicks, he's the Democratic strategist. And so I've got a lot of questions for them, and I'm sure you do too, especially since we know that Jeff Duncan has transitioned from Republican over to Democrat. Does he think that he'll still be able to have influence in this particular race? Yeah,
it is going to be a race to the first finish line, which is May 19th, which is the primary. And a lot of analysts will tell you that these candidates, it's really not just a race for who comes out on top on the May 19th primary, but really a race for that second place position, because it's likely there could be a runoff. As you know, in Georgia politics, someone has to get 50 plus 1. If that doesn't happen, there's a runoff, which could be likely in this case. So Georgia politics is always fascinating. And tonight is going to be a great night. We want to welcome everybody watching across the state of Georgia in what we believe will be the first of a number of debates. We want to mention, of course, we have invited all the Republican candidates to come in as well. So we hope that this is the first of many debates. So we've got a wide megaphone tonight for these candidates to make their appeal. I think the number that stands out to me, Ron, as we're talking about polling is really the number on the top of the polling results was undecided. Keisha Lance Bottoms has the highest polling numbers in these preliminary polls, and she's polling in the 30%. But 38% of voters polled to this point say they don't know yet who they're going to vote for. And that's why nights like tonight are so important.
And you know, that makes it really a lot more interesting, especially for our Georgia voters out there who are going to be voting coming up here pretty soon on May 19th for the for Election Day and for the primary. What makes it so interesting, if it's that tight of a race, possibly that tight of a race, that means that there's a lot more at stake tonight. They have to bring their A game. All 3 of those candidates have to try to convince our voters out there why they should represent on the Democratic side, why they should represent the Democratic Party, and why they should be Georgia's next governor. The other thing that's interesting, the rules. So if they have to actually get up there and debate, well, there's rules that takes place that keeps them intact. So I'm going to show you the rules right here. So each topic, primary question, 60 seconds. That's when they have to answer it. The follow-up question, 30 seconds. But this is what's really interesting. The clarifying question or the clarifying answer, they only have 15 seconds to be able to answer that under the debate rules. So Zach Merchant, Faith Jesse, they have a lot going on tonight as they prepare for tonight's debate.
Let's check in with Zach and Faith as we preview this Democratic debate.
We are less than 30 minutes away from the beginning of tonight's debate. It starts at 7 o'clock and it includes the top contenders in the Democratic gubernatorial primary, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, former DeKalb County CEO Mike Thurmond, and former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. They'll all be on the stage with me and Faith in just about 30 minutes.
That's right, and the timing here very important because we are looking ahead to a May 19th primary. All three of these candidates, as well as some other competitors who will not be on this stage, they want that Democratic nomination to take them into November. It's likely that this contest could go to a runoff on May 19th. A lot of analysts saying that former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms will be out on top. The question is who will come into second place. So tonight, these candidates will have the floor to prove to the Georgia voters on not just broad policy, but specifics on how they would do things differently than the Republican control that we have seen for quite some time here in the state.
And it is a big opportunity for that crowded Democratic primary field. In a recent poll, almost 40% of respondents said they were undecided.
Yeah.
A big opportunity for all of these candidates to share their message with voters right here in Atlanta on 11 Alive Plus and WATL, but also on our partner stations all across the state. This is a statewide debate. It is live, and it is coming up now in less than 30 minutes. We'll see you at 7 o'clock.
All right, Zach, Faith, we're very much looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I think this hour is going to fly by. There's a lot of ground to cover, and I think voters are really locked in because there are so many issues that are directly impacting voters every time they walk into a grocery store, every time they fill up a tank of gas. So they're looking for candidates on both sides of the aisle to speak to them where they're at in their everyday lives, and we'll see how the Democrats do that tonight.
Yeah, that's right. So I love going out into the community. Absolutely love it because it's one thing hearing from a politician, right? But to hear from the people out there that it impacts them the most, as you pointed out, the grocery store, the gas station, you know, just trying to make ends meet for their family. So I went out in Metro Atlanta and just grabbed a handful of people and I asked them, if you were in that debate room, if you can actually speak to those politicians, what would be top of mind for you? And this is what some of them had to say.
I mean, I think obviously gas prices are a big deal right now, prices on anything. But I don't know, there's a lot going on in the world.
Affordable housing, you know, the day-to-day of trying to, like, what would they do to, I guess, help the cost of, like, housing, you know, renting your apartment, the rising cost of gas.
The costs of living now are going up.
Just something about the food prices.
We need a lot more consideration and tolerance of people who might be of a different opinion.
Just something about the homeless population. It's pretty unfortunate.
You know, one of those individuals said it best. There's a lot going on in the world right now, a lot going on in the world, and a lot of questions that people want answered. And solutions. I think people really looking for solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, top of mind, once again, even though I know we're going to be hitting a lot of topics here tonight, Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant, but the one thing that stood out, once again, was crime. They want to, especially in light of what's been happening in Metro Atlanta over the past couple of weeks, they want to make sure that they feel safe in their community. They want to be able to go out to the grocery store, to the gas station, and feel safe. And the other thing, as you know, Cheryl, is cost of living. Can I take care of my family with the budget that I have now based upon the circumstances that are happening in our state?
Oh, well, we'll certainly be asking all the candidates about that very question, covering all of that ground and much more. And these candidates know that the climb to a statewide office for a Democrat in Georgia is a lofty climb. It's been a seat that's been locked in by the Republicans. Governor Kemp, of course, has been a governor who has polled so high, been able to draw from both sides in his support. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But I'm looking forward to talking to our political analysts because as the country watches Georgia.
Yeah.
We've been accustomed to this, especially in the last few election cycles. They're pointing to a couple of races like the Public Service Commission, or we just saw the race for Marjorie Taylor Greene's replacement, and the margin shifting a little bit. Are Democrats gaining ground? Is there a crack in the armor, perhaps? Do they see a path to winning this gubernatorial race? So there's so much to talk about. It's always fascinating, as Georgia politics are. So we'll be talking to our political analysts coming up here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, so stick around, folks. We're going to take a quick break, but we're going to see you on the other side of that break.
Welcome back. Debate night here on 11 Alive Plus, and the state of Georgia watching closely to see what happens leading up to the primary, May 19th. Early voting starts right around the corner on April 27th. In studio tonight, we have 3 Democratic candidates in the gubernatorial race, and we are looking forward to hear what they have to say. We want to bring in our analysts to talk more about their perspective and what they're looking for tonight as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we have Spiro Amber. He actually represents the Republican side, a Republican strategist. I have a question for you, sir. First of all, thanks for being here. But I have a question for you, sir. Okay. When it comes to Jeff Duncan, him transitioning from being a Republican now over to the Democratic side, and we know that here in Georgia, that governor's seat has been red for a long time. Do you think he'll be able to transition some of those voters from the Republican side, those moderates, those independents, over to his side and give him a chance at that governor's office? What are your thoughts?
Well, I assume you're asking me about voting in the Democratic primary.
Yeah.
Those voters switching over to the Democratic side. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to get Republican voters or traditional Republican voters to cross over and vote in the Democrat primary. He may have the ability, though, to attract independent voters, those who may from time to time vote in either primary of their choice. That's what I'm watching to see, if he's able to attract those types of voters who might otherwise maybe vote for a Republican candidate in the primary, maybe switch over to vote on the Democratic side on May 19th.
Spiro, I want to talk more about the independents, because in races that we see, margins are very tight. I mean, we've seen that maybe in the past. I'm thinking back to when it was a Brian Kemp, Stacey Abrams race, and it came down to 50,000 votes, which in the governor's race was very tight. Yeah. Or even in some of the presidential cycles, as the changing dynamics in the state of Georgia are what they are. How important is it to fight for the margins here? You may not flip a county, but you can pull enough independents over to change an outcome. Talk about that and how much you expect to hear from these candidates tonight, maybe trying to appeal to those independent voters specifically.
I think that's critically important to winning the governor's race, in November. And I think candidates on either side of the aisle in the primary always have sort of, one eye looking into the future toward November. But first, they have to get out of the primary and become the nominee, likely in a runoff scenario. So I think that they're more focused right now on, in this case tonight, traditional Democratic voters, and speaking to the base of Georgians who would vote in that Democrat primary. But to your question, I think that, that they can't afford to get too far to the extreme in order to hopefully keep those more moderate or independent voters in the fold.
Okay, right now we have Fred Hicks. He's the Democratic strategist. Thank you for joining us this evening as well. Let's talk about the front runner right now. So CNN is saying that former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms is considered the front runner. Do you think that, how difficult will it be for her to be able to take on that Republican challenger coming up here in November, if she makes it that far?
Yeah, so I think that Mayor Bottoms has two things. She has a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is making herself known and liked to people outside of Atlanta. Historically, in the general election, Republicans have run against Atlanta, and she embodies Atlanta, having been the former mayor. But the opportunity for her is that Donald Trump and Republicans are woefully unpopular with independents, anyone who's not really a far-right Republican. And so if she can acquit herself well in the primary, and if she can somehow or other manage to run without a runoff, and then take that opportunity in that time to move across the state of Georgia, then she has an opportunity to win this election in November. But again, she's gonna have to make herself a Georgian and not so much an Atlantan in the general election.
Fred, I want to follow up on that. she obviously has name recognition, but as you mentioned, specifically, maybe more than anything in this, the 5 counties in the metro, but 159 counties in those rural counties that are often not just red, but bright red. Now, she does have the experience as the senior advisor in the Biden administration, so there's national name recognition. So if she's the front runner, how much is this a race at this point, in this moment, for second place, thinking that a runoff is a likely scenario here?
So the race really is right now, to your point, there are two races taking place. Number one, if I'm on the Mayor Bottoms team, I'm trying to win without a runoff. Looking at what's happening on the Republican side, Burt Jones and Rick Jackson are blowing themselves up. That's probably going to a runoff, and they'll continue to do that for another 28 days. And so you can use that time to raise money, to build your infrastructure, and build your team. If I can't to win this without a runoff, then I'm trying to get as close to that margin as possible. And so that makes this race for second really, really important. And with so many undecided voters out there, and when we look at the aggregate poll numbers, there's really a 2-3-way cluster for second, depending on how you look at it. That is a very, very important race. And depending on the matchup, Mayor Bottoms can have a more difficult, or some might consider an easier path to the runoff. So this debate tonight is really, really important for her.
Mr. Hicks, I was going to ask you too, as far as the candidates tonight, we've been focused a lot on Jeff Duncan, focused a lot on the former mayor. But the third candidate tonight, obviously, is Mike Thurmond, longtime DeKalb County resident, been around for quite some time. What do you think, and this is just your point of view, obviously, what do you think his chances of going up against notable names such as Jeff Duncan and Keisha Lance Bottoms? What is his chance of appealing to Georgia as a whole? I know that he has obviously a lot of name recognition here in Metro Atlanta, but beyond Metro Atlanta.
So CEO Thurmond, I say CEO Thurmond because he was the CEO of DeKalb County for 8 years. He is, based on the polling, he is in the best position to move into second place because he really hasn't spent any of his money. But yet, when you aggregate the polls, he's sitting there 1, 2, 3 points behind. If he's in fourth, then he's only a couple of points behind the person who's in second, and maybe 1 or 2 points behind the person who's in third. And just depending on how you look at it, he's sitting right there. He hasn't done anything significant yet with his money. And so it looks to me like if he were to have a good buy and have a good strategy, media buying a good strategy down the stretch here, he could find himself in the runoff, and he would present probably the most formidable challenge for Mayor Bottoms, given that they're both executives. They both were in office pretty much at the same time. He was elected in 2016. She was elected in 2017. He did 2 terms. She did 1 term. He has statewide experience, having served as a labor commissioner, and she does not, although she had, as you pointed out, she was with the Biden administration. And so those two would make for a very interesting runoff election or campaign between those two. But he's well positioned. But I want to be very clear. The race for second is really up in the air, and it's really going to come down to 2 weeks into early voting right now, a week and a half to early voting. It's going to come down to how they spend their money and how they execute their game plans and who has the right game plan, because second place is really up in the air right now.
Yeah, messaging, strategy, and then making sure that voters are motivated to show up when that early voting starts, and that's coming around the corner on April 27th. I want to bring Spiro back in. Just curious, from the Republican point of view, who worries the Republicans most? Who would they feel would be the toughest to beat when it comes down to it in November?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the conventional thought right now is that it would be, former Mayor Bottoms, but kind of, not to say exactly what Fred said, but just sort of to add to that. And I'm kind of interested in getting his take too on this, is that, you have 3 candidates here tonight who, what I would call kind of seasoned pros at this point, and certainly who also have not just a statewide, sort of name recognition, but national to some degree too. You've got the old pro and Mike Thurmond, who served many years as a statewide elected official, now many years as DeKalb County CEO. It's kind of the old guard versus the new guard, so to speak. From my vantage point, and with Mayor Bottoms and Mike Thurmond being both, DeKalb County, City of Atlanta, those are your traditional Democratic bases that they have to run from. But now you have Jeff Duncan, who, 10 years ago, when I was working, as chief of staff to the speaker, he was long as a member of the House. He was one of the more conservative members at the time, and then he gets elected lieutenant governor, and he's done a complete 180 in terms of his political, in terms of the political spectrum. So, I'm really interested to see. It seems like he's kind of coming as, sort of the dark horse here in the Democratic primary. And to Fred's point, there's a large amount of undecided voters, that perhaps he can, resonate with. And I think from Republicans' perspective, I think that, if a Jeff Duncan were to be the nominee, I think that could be a real problem for Republicans in November in terms of those middle of the road voters, and perhaps, Mr. Thurman as well, I think would be very formidable and would attract people from both sides of the aisle.
So, Mr. Amber, I got a question for you. We would love to have Republicans come on 11 Alive and streaming on 11 Alive Plus to debate. However, we're still waiting for that answer. Do you feel like they need to debate, or for them is this wait and see? Not debating does not hurt them, and having a debate, maybe they don't see it as an advantage. Why do you think they haven't responded up until now of debating on any platform?
I'm not sure, frankly. I think that my understanding is that there is a debate on the Republican side that hasn't been agreed to. I don't have all the details of that, but I believe there is going to be a debate. I think, the more opportunities that voters have to hear from candidates, particularly those who seemingly come out of nowhere and, are kind of the new shiny object on either side. I think the more opportunities that voters have to hear from those candidates, it's better overall.
I want to ask Fred a quick question here. When we look back at the Public Service Commission, of course, there was a vote for Democrats, and that really wasn't based on a name, but more of the issue. They just saw Republicans in office, rates going up, and so there was some movement there for the Democrats. We're looking at, Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat. There was a smaller gap for Clay Fuller than we saw for President Trump. From the Democrats' perspective, do you feel like there's a crack in the armor? Does it look like opportunity from where you're sitting for whomever becomes the Democratic nominee for governor?
Absolutely. In some respects, and I don't want to be too bullish about it because campaigns are very unpredictable, but I really feel like any of these three, and maybe even a fourth candidate on the Democratic side, could win in November. So a few months ago, before the PSC elections, Democrats, we were kind of wringing our hands about who's going to be the best person, who's the most electable. That's who we need to get behind. But after the PSC elections and what's happening nationally with gas prices and decreasing affordability and increasing medical costs and things like that, I feel very confident that whether you're Jeff Duncan, whether you're Michael Thurman, whether you're Kitchen Bottoms, or one of the candidates, Jason Estes, or whoever who's not on here, given the sheer number of undecideds, that Democrats are going to have an advantage going into November. That doesn't mean we'll win. That means we'll have an advantage. And one more thing, and we talked about it, I talk about this often. You look at all the elections since 2018 forward, there have been 9 what I call top of the ticket ballots, elections for Senate or governor. Or president. Democrats have won 6 of those. Republicans have only won 3. A little bit more than 200,000 more votes in the aggregate have been cast for Democrats than Republicans. And so the PSC was not a blip. It was the latest data point in a trend line that showed Georgia has definitely moved from the ruby red state that it was to purple, maybe a little indigo and borderline blue.
Interesting. Well, for the first time in 12 years, Governor Kemp not on a ballot, and he has been so strong in many ways. He has buoyed up the Republican Party. So this is a fascinating time to be watching Georgia politics, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, or if you're in the middle, trying to figure out what your next move is.
Absolutely. We got a live look right now. This is where the debate is going to take place. Obviously, on the far left-hand side, you can see former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, Keisha Lance Bottoms, former mayor of Atlanta. She's in the middle. They're looking at their notes. And Mike Thurman, the former Georgia Labor Commissioner and DeKalb County CEO as well. So also, you don't see them on screen right now, but they're going to be prominent during this debate. Of course, they're going to have our very own Zach Merchant and Faith Jesse, the anchors of the Georgia vote. And so it's going to be an exciting and informative debate tonight.
All right, debate starts now. Enjoy, everybody.
It's debate night in Atlanta. In our studio tonight, 3 Democrats, each hoping to become Georgia's next governor. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms.
The reality is we've got to deliver on affordability in this state through reducing the cost of housing.
Former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan.
I've got the opportunity to bring Democrats, independents, and disgusted Republicans to vote for us in 2026 in November.
And former Georgia Labor Commissioner Mike Thurmond.
We have to be #1 in affordable health care. We have to be #1 in public education. We have to be #1 in giving people jobs so they can purchase groceries.
Answering your questions from across the state. This is Debate Night in Atlanta. It's the race for governor, the Democratic debate.
And good evening from Atlanta. This is the Democratic debate and the race for Georgia governor. Thank you so much for joining us from our Midtown Atlanta studio. I'm Faith Jesse.
And I'm Zach Merchant. We are your moderators for tonight's debate that includes 3 candidates from the Democratic field. We're broadcasting live, on air, and online here and on our partner stations all across Georgia. Whether you're joining us from Atlanta, Augusta, Columbus, Macon, or Savannah, we're glad you're here. Before we begin, let's review the rules of the debate.
Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer each question that is directed to them. If a follow-up or rebuttal is needed, the candidate will get 30 seconds to respond. Another 15 seconds if moderators determine that clarification is needed. When their time is up, you will hear the sound of a bell.
Let's now welcome in our candidates who each met the agreed-upon participation criteria for fundraising and nonpartisan polling. Thank you all for being here tonight. Let's get started, and we begin with the issue of immigration. It has been at the center of politics here in Georgia and all across the country. House Bill 1105 was signed into law in 2024. Broadly speaking, it pushes local law enforcement agencies here in Georgia to collaborate with federal immigration enforcement efforts. Mr. Thurmond, by virtue of a card draw, we begin with you. The question here is this, and you have 60 seconds. Do you support local law enforcement agencies in Georgia collaborating with federal immigration enforcement efforts?
ICE must be reformed, and if not reformed, then abolished. I will support the laws of this state. We should have strong borders. Immigrants, illegal immigrants who are convicted of serious crimes must be deported, but hard-working immigrants, legal or otherwise, who are contributing to our economy, who are honest, working hard, trying to access the American dream, we must help them get access to the path to citizenship. Deport the criminals, but reach out to those who've been here for long periods of time, who are contributing to our society, who are working hard, playing by the rules, pursuing the American dream. These individuals must be provided with a path to citizenship. They have to get in the back of the line, but get in the line, and all people, regardless of their immigration status, must be treated with respect and humanity. The U.S. Constitution protects all individuals, citizens and non-citizens, as human beings, and we must respect those rights.
Mr. Thurmond, one 30-second follow-up to you before we move on to Mr. Duncan. On the topic specifically of whether you would support or oppose participation and collaboration between local law enforcement here in Georgia and federal immigration enforcement authorities, do you support or oppose that?
I will support it when it comports with the position I took earlier. I will not support the type of gangland type activities that we saw in Minnesota, where innocent people were murdered, where people are being disrespected regardless of their immigration status. I will always stand for what is right, but I will always speak out against what is wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Thurmond. Mr. Duncan, the same question to you. You have 60 seconds.
Make no mistake about it, Donald Trump's policies around immigration have nothing to do with policies. They have to do all with fear and intimidation. We've watched this play out all across the country. We've seen it play out in the streets of Minneapolis. We've seen people literally lose their lives because Kristi Noem wanted a 5-second soundbite on Twitter. Look, it's inappropriate for us to use state resources to reinforce these fake ICE raids that are all about fear and intimidation. I think one of the most disgusting sights I've seen in this whole play out in Georgia was state resources being utilized to reinforce ICE efforts around the Hyundai raid. Here, a company produced $5+ billion worth of investments in our state, and they had 450 individuals that, quite honestly, after further look, a cell phone and a clipboard would have cleared up the clerical errors. And instead, those folks spent a long weekend in jail shackled. As governor, I will not use state resources to reinforce these ICE raids that are being administered by the Trump administration for nothing but fear and intimidation. And as far as working with the federal agencies, yeah, absolutely. When it's appropriate, I think the system works well. But it's not working well now because it's being led by a dictator named Donald Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Bottoms, the same question to you. 60 seconds.
When I was mayor of Atlanta, I closed our city jail to ICE because I could not be assured that we would be complicit in the family separation policy. That was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. On a daily basis, federal, local, and state governments coordinate, as well as law enforcement agencies. But when we are dealing with Donald Trump's ICE in 2026, we certainly have to take a second look at what that collaboration looks like. I am concerned that when we collaborate with ICE, with local law enforcement, that we aren't focusing on removing hardened criminals, violent criminals from the street, but we are focused on people who are going about their everyday lives, hoping to achieve the American dream. We have to be careful because often immigrant communities are often afraid to even call law enforcement in their time of need. So as long as it's responsible and lawful collaboration, not targeting those who are most vulnerable, I will support it.
Ms. Bottoms, one 30-second follow-up to you before we move on. You talk about responsible and lawful collaboration. Can you specify what that would look like in your view?
Unfortunately, what we've seen, and we don't have to look any further than Minnesota, we have seen ICE go rogue. We've seen ICE come into communities not being thoughtful about how they are detaining people, not being thoughtful about how federal agents, including the calling up of the National Guard into our cities, how it is done that comports with the collaboration that's needed to not only protect our citizens, but also to protect law enforcement. When law enforcement is not coordinating responsibly and lawfully, it puts everyone at risk.
Thank you for your answer, Ms. Bottoms. Our next topic is on affordability, which is one of the main themes of this 2026 campaign across America. Mr. Duncan, you will have the first response to this question. And I ask you, families across Georgia, they are paying more for just about everything right now: gas, food, travel, the overall cost of living. What is one policy that you would implement at the state level to bring down costs? And what would it cost the state to do that? You have 60 seconds to respond.
Yeah, this affordability crisis is hitting everybody, whether you own a big business or you're living check to check. The affordability crisis is real and tangible in every household. And it comes in different shapes and sizes. One of the big ideas I've come up with is I want to utilize part of the $17 billion rainy day fund that we have in this state. I want to take 10% of that and put it in a jumpstart fund. $1.7 billion worth of discretionary budget for the governor to be able to put that and wrap it around the axle of poverty. One of the reasons why I'm standing here as a proud Democrat is because I got tired of watching Republicans demonize poverty. There's things that you can do as governor. You can better fund the CAPS program that lowers child care costs and allows a single parent to go back to work. You can reinforce affordable housing projects like Mayor Dickens and Mayor Van Johnson in Savannah's projects and lower the price of housing. You can expand Medicaid. There's lots of opportunities, but we need to start investing in individuals, not just giving handouts, but investing. And I think this is an opportunity for us to make an investment in Georgians.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Bottoms.
Suspending the gas tax is one way that we can address the issue as it relates to gas costs in this state. Also, joining other states who've already sued the Trump administration on tariffs that are unfairly impacting small businesses in the state. Also, the Port of Savannah is being directly impacted because of the erratic tariffs that Trump has instituted. Also, making sure that we are expanding Medicaid in this state. Over 1.5 million Georgians saw their health care premiums go up because of the refusal of the Trump administration to extend the ACA subsidies, and creating a statewide affordable housing trust fund in the same way that I did it as mayor of Atlanta. When we closed the multi-billion-dollar transaction that's now known as Centennial Yards, we created an affordable housing trust fund. We can do that across the state to help offset housing costs.
Thank you, Ms. Bottoms. Mr. Thurman.
I will focus on something that I've already done, legislation that I passed as a member of the Georgia House of Representatives. Over the time that this legislation has been in force, we have generated over $300 million in tax relief for senior citizens and working families. As you file your taxes today, if you look at the Georgia tax bill, you will find if you're a senior citizen, if you're a low-income working family, you're going to get a tax break, and it's a tax break that I put in law and a bill that I authored. I would also expand, Mr. Duncan mentioned CAPS program. I started the CAPS program when I was the DFACS director. The first money spent in child care for low-income working families was the CAPS program. I would expand the income cap so that more families. I'll invest $25 million my first year in office so we can have an additional 20,000 scholarships for hard, young, working families. And third, what I'll continue to do is work every day to help working Georgians.
One follow-up for you, Mr. Thurman. When would Georgians see the difference? We can focus on the CAPS program. How long would it take for people to start seeing that?
One budget cycle. The first year of my administration, I'm very familiar with CAPS. We created the CAPS program when I was the director of the Department of Family and Children's Services. It's one of the most effective ways to help young working families. The average choice of cost of child care is between $800 and $1,000 a month. When we provide you with a scholarship, that's like $1,000 a month salary increase for every working heads of household in Georgia. We did it before. I did it as DFACS director. I'll make it more generous as your next governor.
Thank you all for those answers. We're going to stay on the topic of the economy, and we're going to turn to a question coming from our sister station, 13 WMAZ in Macon. We're going to play that question in just a moment. Ms. Bottoms, that first answer is going to go to you. This is 13 WMAZ news anchor Frank Malloy.
Right here in Central Georgia, Robins Air Force Base is a critical economic engine. It provides good-paying jobs, opportunities for folks across the region. As governor, what would you do to help make sure that Robins and other critical industries have enough skilled workers to support the jobs that are available?
Ms. Bottoms, that question goes to you first. 60 seconds.
Yes, I had an opportunity to work in Macon at another station in Macon, so thank you for that question. What we need to focus on is creating workforce training development. I did it as mayor of Atlanta, and I know it can be done statewide. We created the Center for Workforce Innovation at Atlanta Area Tech, where we trained people for six-figure jobs as plumbers, as airline mechanics, as coders. The list goes on. This can and should be done statewide, especially in conjunction with areas that are heavily populated by a veteran population. We have over 15 companies in the state, Fortune 500 companies. This is something that is of interest to the entire state, because what we know is that when we have a trained workforce, it betters our state, it is better for our economy, it's better for our communities. We've seen it work in Atlanta, and I know that it can be done statewide.
Thank you, Ms. Bottoms. Mr. Thurman, the same question to you.
Great question for the former labor commissioner here in the state of Georgia. As the labor commissioner, we helped over 300,000 Georgians get training and access to new jobs and new careers. As the former DFACS director, we helped over 90,000 Georgians move from welfare to work. Workforce training is the key. As the next governor, I will create a public school system that has multiple pathways to success. Liberal arts, go to UGA, Morehouse, Spelman, Georgia State, great choices. But we have to also invest in our outstanding technical college system. We have to help parents and students know that it's just as brilliant to go to Georgia Tech as it is to go to Atlanta Tech. We're going to make sure that we recognize white collar, blue collar, no collar. It's the green and the dollar, not the color of the collar, that will create great jobs and great careers, and we need to invest in that.
Mr. Duncan, same question to you. 60 seconds.
Yeah, first, my prayers go out to all those in harm's way in our military that are in the Middle East and across the globe. There's no better neighbor to have than a veteran or somebody that's a member of the military, and we're blessed to have so many folks in so many different parts of our state. We've got to do our job getting folks ready for a 21st century economy. That includes K through 12, making sure that kids have those opportunities to have skill training in their K through 12 education. We also have to make sure we have partnerships with our technical schools that are based in reality in that community. Public-private partnerships that are able to embrace apprenticeship programs, labor groups that have apprenticeship and training programs, making sure that those 21st century jobs are ready to qualify them to work with those military operations. You know, as Lieutenant Governor, one of the things I stood for was creating the technology capital of the East Coast. I wanted Georgia to be the technology capital of the East Coast. We're able to stand up an incredible group called Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, which drove internships with young Georgian students out into those rural parts of the state and worked on a number of those areas around those military bases, and look forward to continuing to scale those programs up.
Mr. Duncan, thank you so much for your answer. Our next topic is surrounding rural Georgia and the topic of health care specifically in rural Georgia. Mr. Thurman, you will have the first question or first response to the question here. This question, it comes from our partner station WSAV News 3 in Savannah. Here's news anchor Tina Tyus-Shaw.
Since 2005, 9 rural hospitals in Georgia have closed and another 20 are at risk. That is according to the Center for Healthcare Quality and Payment Reform. As a governor, would you prioritize keeping all rural hospitals open, or would you accept some closures in order to reduce costs and invest in alternatives like telemedicine and regional care centers?
Mr. Thurman, the first response is to you.
Thank you so much. I was born and raised in rural Georgia on a dead-end dirt road. I know what it's like to grow up in rural Georgia and feel like the people in the big city have overlooked or had less concern for my family and the issues that we would face. I will expand Medicaid during the first year of my administration. We will expand it from the inside out, not the outside in. The governor controls 90% of the budget. And by the way, the Republicans, over the last 10 years, those current and former Republicans prevented the expansion of Medicaid. We have left $20 billion on the table in Washington because we refused to expand Medicaid. I was in Charlton County standing by an abandoned hospital just a few weeks ago. It is disgraceful. And as your next governor, I promise you this, you will not have to not have access to health care simply because you're born in rural Georgia. Rural Georgia will have a seat at the table in the Thurman administration.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman. Mr. Duncan, the floor is yours.
So I've been working on this issue since 2015. I was the author of the Rural Hospital Tax Credit that now, looking back, has raised over $500 million for 54 rural hospitals and allowed them the creativeness to try to solve some of those problems. But make no mistake about it, Donald Trump and his MAGA followers and every Republican candidate that's in this governor's race is attacking our rural hospitals straight on and making it impossible for them to stay open in their communities or to deliver the services that their communities expect. Look, I've been behind enemy lines on this issue. I try to look at opportunities to improve our health care system in Georgia as a former Republican, and you can't do it without expanding Medicaid. As governor, I will lead the charge. I know the members in the General Assembly on both sides of the aisle that are supportive of this effort will pass the legislation, we'll fund it, and we'll draw down those federal dollars. But there's also opportunities to create investments in technology to drive access deeper into the rural communities so that we can start to tackle infant and maternal mortality rates at a substantial rate and to deliver services in those rural communities and allow them to economically develop.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Bottoms.
The state of health care in this state is shameful. We are the home to the CDC, yet we do have 9 rural hospitals that have already closed. We have 300,000 people who aren't insured in this state because of the refusal to expand Medicaid. We left $700 million on the table because of the refusal to expand Medicaid. Reopening hospitals in our rural communities has to be a priority. We also have to invest heavily in making sure that we have public health clinics, mobile health clinics, that we are giving incentives to health care providers to go to rural communities and provide much needed health care. In some communities, you could be even an hour away. Some people ask, why does it matter to me if I don't have Medicaid or don't live in a rural community? Well, if you've ever passed through one, it should matter to you. It literally is a matter of life and death.
Thank you all. We are going to bring another question from one of our partner stations. Mr. Duncan, you're going to have the first response here. This question comes from our partner station, WJBF News Channel 6 in Augusta, from anchor Brad Means.
You know, sometimes from a legislative perspective, it feels like it's Atlanta and the rest of the state. If you're elected, how can you make sure that you are not focused on Atlanta only and that the rest of the state gets your attention too?
Mr. Duncan, we begin with you, 60 seconds.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different caucuses that show up at the Georgia Capitol. It's not just Democrats versus Republicans, it's urban versus rural. And there's other dynamics that play out. And to do that, you have to be intentional about looking above party lines, above geography lines. You've got to build consensus. I've got a resume that shows that that's exactly what I've done as a state representative, as lieutenant governor. I've built those coalitions to get big, tough things across the finish line. We talk about hate crimes. Many Republicans did not want to pass a hate crimes piece of legislation. In the aftermath of the civil unrest and the violent crime spree that was happening across our streets here in Atlanta and other spots, and the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, I wanted to pass the hate crimes legislation, and Republicans pushed back. I worked with Democrats to get that to the floor and to get unanimous support of that legislation. Same thing with education reform, health care reform, budget reform. There's opportunities for us to work together, but a governor has to show up and work for all 11 million Georgians, not just the ones that vote for him.
Ms. Bottoms?
Yeah, Atlanta may be the capital city, but it certainly is not the only city. It's not the only community. That's the reason I've been to Augusta and Richmond County multiple times to hear directly from people, and that is what I will do, God willing, when I am elected governor. I will be there listening to people as I have when I have heard them express concerns about affordability, concerns about access to health care, concerns about quality education in our communities. Nothing beats getting on the ground. I like to say fondly, the streets don't lie. And when you are talking to people directly, you know what matters to them in their communities. While our needs may be similar, they are often community specific, and I will continue to work on behalf of all of Georgia, spending my time outside of the metro area, listening to people across this state.
Ms. Bottoms, one follow-up for you. This will be 30 seconds. You talk about having the conversations across the state. What specifically would you do to turn those conversations into actual policy?
Well, it's actually helped shape our policy. When I launched our campaign for governor, I had a list of priorities, but as I have moved around the state listening to people, it's helped expand it, including creating a pathway for free technical and community college. I've talked about expanding Medicaid and the specific needs of communities in terms of access to health care in those specific communities. So my list of priorities has gone probably from around 4 or 5 to a list of at least 10, just based on what I've heard as I've moved around the state.
Thank you, Ms. Bottoms. Mr. Thurman, 60 seconds to you.
I'm asking voters to move beyond the promises and look at performance. As the Labor Commissioner, I had 60 offices all across the state of Georgia, and we worked hard. As the DFACS director, I had 159 offices in every county. That is how we helped so many Georgians get back to work. I appreciate the question from Augusta. I'm a proud graduate of Payne College who really gave me the opportunity to really become and pursue my dreams in public service. When the Hurricane Helene hit Augusta, Georgia, people can promise they'll be there for you. When the lights were out and the water was off and the food had disappeared, we formed a partnership with the Augusta-Richmond County government. With Mayor Johnson, we created a Good Neighbor Express and delivered 10 tractor-trailer loads of fresh fruit, Georgia-grown vegetables. That's what caring about the rest of Georgia is about. It's not just the promise, but it's the performance. At the most toughest time in the history of Augusta, we were there.
All right, Mr. Thurman, thank you so much. Appreciate your answer to that question. Well, now we would like to direct individual questions to each candidate. Only this candidate will respond to that question. Former Mayor Bottoms, we want to start with you. You were Atlanta's mayor from 2018 to 2022. In that time, Atlanta saw major social justice issues, the COVID-19 pandemic, a spike in violent crime. You opted not to run for a second term, joining a very short list of one-term Atlanta mayors. Now, some of your critics have accused you of leaving the city behind during a pivotal time. Well, did you leave Atlanta behind, and what is your response to that criticism?
I was very proud of my time as mayor of Atlanta. In fact, when I left the mayor's office, my approval rating was at 68%, which is incredibly high. I left $180 million in the bank, 4 years of balanced budgets, no property tax increases. I created a child savings account for all public kindergartners across our state. I also created a citywide affordable housing program citywide. So I was very proud of my service. But at that time, I made the decision based on what was best for me personally and for my family. I had the opportunity after I completed my 4-year term as mayor, I had the opportunity to serve in the White House. In fact, I'd been asked 3 times by President Biden to join the White House, and I didn't do it because I was committed to completing my term as mayor. I had an opportunity to go to the Biden White House and work and advocate on behalf of all Georgians.
One follow-up for you, Mayor Bottoms. Why not run for a second term? Did you have your eyes set on a Biden White House?
Absolutely not. If I'd had my eyes set on the Biden White House, I would have taken the opportunity to join his cabinet as I had been asked to do. I made a decision based on what was best for my family. My kids were very young at that time. And again, very proud of that decision, very proud of the term that I completed. I left the mayor's office with my head held very high, and I don't regret not serving a second term. Having the opportunity to later serve in the Biden White House and make sure that I could advocate on behalf of all Georgians was a privilege, and I'm very proud of that work.
Mr. Thurman, this next question is for you. You were first elected to the Georgia General Assembly in 1986. You've been in state politics for 40 years. What do you say to those who argue it is time for a new generation of Democratic politicians to take center stage?
I think it's time for new vision, new leadership, and new direction. I'm proud to be the one candidate in this race, Republican or Democrat, who has a track record of success. When people are hungry, when we were passing out boxes of food in DeKalb County, at Hosea Feed the Hungry when SNAP benefits were taken away. Just 2 weeks ago, when the TSA workers had been without a paycheck for nearly 2 months, no one asked me what my age was or anything about how long I'd served. They were just saying, thank you for helping us at a time of need. I promise you this, Zach, when we expand Medicaid and all of a sudden people who hadn't had access to health care will now be able to go to a doctor, they won't care how long I've been in office. When we finally bring jobs to rural Georgia, when rural Georgia finally gets a seat at the table, when we finally fund education so that every child will have access to a quality education, no one will ask how long I've been there. They'll just say, thank you for the work that you've done. I have a track record. I'm proud of it. It's not about promises, it's performance.
Mr. Thurmond, thank you so much for your answer. Mr. Duncan, this next question is for you. You spent the vast majority of your political career as a conservative Republican, but here you are tonight, rocking a blue tie as a Democrat. Under your watch as Lieutenant Governor, Georgia passed policies like the state's restrictive abortion ban and so-called constitutional carry laws, allowing broad access to firearms. Well, you have said again and again that you have changed your views, but that is quite the big change to make in just a few years. Why should a voter believe you?
Yeah, the question I get asked most often on the campaign trail is, what is that point in time or that issue that changed your mind to switch parties? And the reality is it opens up a great conversation for me to talk about the journey that I've been on, the journey that has better understood the importance of bipartisanship and consensus building, the importance to know that common sense gun legislation makes all the sense in the world with universal background checks and red flag laws and in-home safe storage laws. Expanding Medicaid is the only way to fix it. I've grown a lot of political courage, but I've also gotten some moral clarity on important issues like the heartbeat bill. I was wrong to think a room full of state legislators knew better than millions of women, and they don't. When I understood those deep, complicated medical scenarios and deep personal situations, I beyond a shadow of a doubt believe women deserve the right to choose between themselves, their faith, their family, and their doctors. And day one as governor, I'll sign that executive order that clarifies doctors can practice medicine without fear of prosecution. And I'll also introduce legislation to repeal the 6-week ban and meet millions of women where they want us to. Here's the thing. Republicans know they're wrong on a number of these issues: guns, Medicaid, and abortion. I believe I can work with building a coalition big enough across party lines to get those actions passed.
One follow-up for you, Mr. Duncan. What do you say to critics who say, well, he just switched over to the Democratic Party because he had a better chance of getting governor there?
Yeah, I can assure you no political consultant told me it would be easier to switch parties and run for governor. If I simply just wanted to wake up and be governor, I would have stayed in the Republican Party. I would have bit my tongue off every time Donald Trump said something stupid, which was every 5 minutes. And I would have been first in line to be governor. I didn't want to be a Republican. I was embarrassed to call myself a Republican. I was embarrassed to sit at my own kitchen table and look at my wife and kids as a Republican. I've decided to switch parties because I have a better toolkit to reach into to help people and help their needs. I'm a proud Democrat now and look forward to being a governor to govern as a proud Democrat.
Thank you all for your answers. We turn now to this, our next topic. It has to do with the issue of public safety. Mr. Thurmond, you're going to get the first answer here. And this question comes from Chuck Williams at WRBL News 3 in Augusta on a topic that impacts communities there, here in Atlanta, and all across the state.
Columbus and the surrounding communities are fighting a gang problem: murders, drug and human trafficking, and the recruitment of younger members. What in your plan will help address that problem in Muskogee County and the rest of the state?
And our apologies, too. I should say he is from Columbus, not Augusta.
Georgia.
I shouldn't have disrespected Chuck Williams like that. We know who he is and his reporting, and we appreciate it. Mr. Thurmond, the first question goes to you. You have 60 seconds.
The legendary Chuck Williams. But let me go back to something Mr. Duncan said about constitutional carry. Many of the murders, much of the gang activity is being fueled by young men bent on death and destruction, and the almost universal access to guns in our state. The Second Amendment protects the right of law-abiding citizens to protect themselves, to engage in recreation. But constitutional carry that law enforcement opposed throughout the state, Mr. Duncan, the Republicans voted for it anyway. It has brought about death and destruction in many of our neighborhoods. I accept the apology, but even with the apology, the reality exists that people are still dying at a horrendous rate. Gangs are marauding across our communities, and constitutional carry is helping to fuel that violence in many of our neighborhoods. We have to change this. We have to get back to law-abiding citizens doing the right for our state.
Mr. Duncan, we go to you. You can have a chance to respond to Mr. Thurman's comments if you'd like, and also respond to Chuck Williams' broader question about what you would do to curb violent crime.
Yeah, Michael's right. Constitutional carry is a disaster. It causes law enforcement officers to sit there for literally hours trying to determine if somebody's legally allowed to be concealing a weapon. And I believe a majority of Republicans know it's wrong, and I look forward to leading the charge in repealing that law and allowing police officers to get back to being able, if somebody wants to carry a concealed weapon, most folks that I know don't have a problem with going through the licensing process to have that concealed weapons license on them and to be able to show it. And with regards to Chuck's question, look, one of the hardest situations I had to deal with as lieutenant governor was this wave of civil unrest that took over our streets, not only in Atlanta, but across the state. And it came in a couple of different forms. One was civil unrest and violent crimes were spiking at post-pandemic, but there also was a lack of leadership. And there was some opportunities to make a difference that didn't happen. One of those was leading the charge with the city of Buckhead. And the city of Buckhead wanted to get created. Burt Jones led the charge, and I stood up to him and made sure that that didn't pass, and passed the Less Crimes Act, which allows each law enforcement agency to have $4 million show up for hire more officers, pay them more, train them better, or equip them better. Look forward to working alongside our law enforcement to have safer communities.
Ms. Bottoms, the question goes to you. 60 seconds. What would you do to curb violent crime across the state?
Well, I'm very proud of what I've done in the area of public safety, including giving police officers and firefighters historic pay raises in the city of Atlanta. But it also means that when we have law enforcement on our streets, we want to make sure that we are creating relationships with community. That's why the first opportunity I had to visit the Oval Office as mayor of Atlanta, when we were talking about federal funding coming into our state regarding COVID, I asked for flexibility in funding so that we could invest in crime prevention. What that meant was that we were able to create a violence intervention program. We need to do that statewide. We were also able to create training programs, entrepreneurship programs for young people. That needs to be done statewide. We were able to do things like invest in more street lights in communities. Believe it or not, that actually helps reduce crime. That needs to be done statewide. It has to be a proactive investment, a proactive creation of relationship with communities so that the first time community interacts with law enforcement is not in the midst of a crisis.
Thank you for your answer, Ms. Bottoms. Our next topic is surrounding Georgia's heartbeat bill. That is now the law of the state. It bans most abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy. Our next question is, if elected, would you let the heartbeat bill stand, or would you work to repeal it? Our first answer goes to Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, certainly. As I mentioned a minute ago, it's got to be repealed. I think millions of Georgia women want us to do that. I think a majority of Georgians want us to repeal the 6-week ban. And I think a majority of the legislature does too. Republicans don't have the votes to stop it. I think we need to figure out the best way to get it into committee, out of committee, onto the House and Senate floors, and get it to the governor's desk. But also the importance of signing the executive order immediately that clarifies doctors can practice medicine without fear of prosecution. And look, like I said, this is a moral clarity issue that allowed me to understand these deeply complicated issues, these horrific outcomes that came as a result of the passage of the heartbeat bill. And I was wrong as the lieutenant governor, the president of the Senate, to think that room full of state legislators knew better than millions of women, because they don't. And a two-dimensional piece of paper will never represent the needs or the issues that are brought forward, and quite honestly is what a woman's toughest decision. And a legislator who's never met or never will meet that woman should not be making the most important decision in that woman's life.
And one follow-up for you, Mr. Duncan. I mean, you just mentioned it, and you have mentioned it several times on the campaign trail. You were one of the original people who was behind the heartbeat bill. How would you accomplish that with a GOP-controlled legislature?
I think, once again, this is an issue that I've been kind of behind enemy lines on. I know the state legislators that aren't supportive of it, and they don't have the political cover. They don't have the political courage to stand up. And look, if they want to blame somebody, they can blame me to get up and do the right thing. I think the same thing follows on guns. I think the same thing's on public education. And the issues go on and on and on. Look, these folks have followed Donald Trump off a cliff, and they're ready for an exit. And if they want to be proud Democrats with me, the more the merrier.
Mr. Duncan, thank you. Ms. Bottoms.
The heartbeat bill needs to be repealed in this state, and it really is a travesty given that we have some of the highest maternal mortality rates in the state, especially as it relates to African American women. We need to have the state restored to Roe standards, where a woman could have the right to choose, and understanding that this is not just about abortion. This is about women who may be experiencing a miscarriage. This is about women who are in need of health care, and doctors are often afraid, healthcare providers are afraid to provide it for fear of prosecution. The heartbeat bill is not in line with who we are as a state and the choices that women have had for over 50 years in this country.
Thank you, Ms. Bottoms. Mr. Thurman.
I will fight to repeal the heartbeat bill, but let's be clear. The repeal will not bring back the lives that have been lost as a result of this legislation. It is horrendous, it's an embarrassment, and all who made it possible have to shoulder the burden of that legislation. It's really not about abortion, it's about access to quality health care. We don't need politicians investing and intervening in the most personal decision that a woman could possibly make. This is a decision that should be between a woman, her faith leader, and the doctor. We have to get out of people's bedrooms. We have to move about the business that the people should be involved in, and they shouldn't be involved in the personal decision that a woman would have to make in one of the most difficult points in her life. The repeal of the bill would be great, but it won't change the reality that we face today.
And just to clarify, you are saying that you would work to repeal it?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman.
We turn now to this. Last year, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 1, known as the Riley-Gaines Act of 2025. It bans transgender athletes from participating in women's and girls' sports in Georgia public schools and universities. If you were governor and that bill came to your desk, would you have signed it or vetoed it? Ms. Bottoms, we begin with you.
Yes, I have 4 children. 2 are twins, a girl and a boy. I know that there is a difference between girls and boys in sports. What I am concerned about is that we are focusing on an issue that's not top of mind for people in this state. People are concerned about affordability. They are concerned about access to education. They are concerned about access to health care. I believe that decisions regarding who competes and how people compete shouldn't be happening. Those decisions should not be made at the state capitol. Those decisions need to be made by the respective athletic associations based on their evaluations of who should and should not compete in certain areas.
And Ms. Bottoms, just to be clear, if that bill did cross your desk as governor, would you have signed it or vetoed it?
I don't support the government making decisions about who should compete in athletics. I believe that decision should be left to respective athletic associations.
So you would have vetoed it?
Yes.
All right, thank you for your answer. Mr. Thurman, the same question to you. If that bill came across your desk and you were governor, would you sign it or veto it?
I would have vetoed it because it's really just a red herring that Republicans have used to generate votes on Election Day. Listen, we should never allow the power of the state to be used to bully innocent children, to create chaos in the lives of families who are dealing with very personal issues. Yes, I would veto it, but more than that, I would expose the hypocrisy of it and focus people back on the key issues rather than focusing on transgender sports that can be dealt with by athletic associations. Let's talk about helping people pay for the price of groceries. Let's talk about getting more health care in rural Georgia. Let's talk about creating good jobs. Those are the issues. When I travel around Georgia, you know what the voters tell me? Mike, we're tired of the foolishness under the gold dome. We are hurting. We can't afford insurance. We can't afford groceries. I can't afford my rent. Focus on the issues that working people are most concerned about. And frankly, transgender sports is not one of those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman. Mr. Duncan, the same question to you. If that bill came across your desk, would you sign or veto it?
You know, one of the worst things Donald Trump and his MAGA sock puppets have instituted in this country is just an environment, an ecosystem of hatred. They've demonized so many different people and ways of life. One of the reasons why I stand here as a proud Democrat is I don't have an asterisk mark next to loving my neighbor. I get to wake up every day and love my neighbor as is. You know, and this issue in particular is not an issue that comes up often on the campaign trail. It's a very small portion of the population, a very fractional part but a very important part of the population. Folks are talking about the affordability crisis. They're talking about the health care crisis. They're talking about the Donald Trump crisis. That's the heat map of concerns amongst Democrats, independents, and yes, even this batch of disgusted Republicans that are showing up that are hopefully going to support us in this campaign so that a Democrat for the first time in nearly 30 years is able to win this governor's race. As governor, I would have vetoed the bill. Because at the end of the day, this bill was not about making a difference. It was about simply picking a fight and proving a point. I think at the end of the day, this conversation needs to be had in small circles, in communities, and not sitting at the legislature trying to worry about their next bail piece in a campaign.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duncan. Our next question is about Medicaid expansion. Our first response going to Mr. Thurman. And we ask you this. Under the Affordable Care Act, states are permitted to expand Medicaid coverage to adults making as much as 138% of the federal poverty level, which in 2024 was about $21,000 for a single person. Many states have opted to expand Medicaid, but Georgia has not. Instead, Governor Brian Kemp has rolled out the Pathways program, which caps Medicaid coverage at a lower income amount. If elected, would you expand Medicaid in Georgia? Mr. Thurman, you have 60 seconds.
Absolutely. Yes, I would. And I know how to do it. As the DFACS director, we face a very similar situation with the Welfare Reform Initiative. In the first year of my administration, we are going to expand Medicaid in Georgia, but we are going to expand it from the inside out as opposed to the outside in. Because Governor Kemp has refused to expand it, there's been a legislative effort. As your next governor, and by the way, in Georgia, the governor controls 90% of the budget. We will expand Medicaid. And by the way, the people who most need Medicaid expansion are working people. They are people who are working, but they either earn too much or not enough. And so consequently, we ought to help working Georgians who are working every day, can't afford to purchase it or not available to purchase it on their jobs. I'm here for working Georgians. I'm here for all of Georgia. I'm here to make sure that we live up to our promise and our vision. Absolutely, we'll expand Medicaid, and I'll do it in my first year.
Mr. Thurman, one clarification question for you. You said you would expand it from the inside out, not the outside in. What does that mean?
It means the governor controls the budget. 90% of the budget is written primarily by the governor. The House and Senate often argues over the 10%. The right governor, Mike Thurman, sitting in the right seat, will appropriate the money to get it done. And by the way, we won't necessarily need new money. You can redirect existing dollars to fund Medicaid for more Georgians.
I have another follow-up, but we do need to move on. I'll get you on a one-on-one interview next time. Mr. Duncan, what is your answer to that question?
In 2014, the legislature passed a law that requires the legislature to be the ones that expand Medicaid. So we will have to work with the legislature to expand Medicaid. I do believe a majority of Republicans are in a position where they understand that the fiscal effects of the federal 9-to-1 match is too significant to ignore it. There's rural hospitals closing, there's services being lost, and so we've got to expand Medicaid. I think this is an issue that Republicans are dead wrong on, and I think it's an opportunity for us to really move our feet on the issue. And it brings not only health care to rural parts of the state and urban parts of the state, but it also brings economic development. In many of the rural communities, the largest economic engine is the hospital, is the health care system. But there's medical deserts all over the state, and looking for opportunities to expand that payer mix, so that hospitals and providers don't have to just have 50% of their patients that can actually pay the bills. They can actually have somebody show up. Look, another reason why I stand here as a proud Democrat is I got tired of driving by a hospital waiting room, watching a family make the toughest decision of their life, whether they go in and bankrupt themselves or they stay home and deal with it on their own. On my watch as governor, we'll expand Medicaid so Georgians can show up to the hospital with insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Bottoms.
There have been multiple opportunities for Republicans to expand Medicaid in the state over decades, and it has not been done. The poverty level needs to be reduced to 100%. In my first 100 days in office, one of the first things that I will do is to begin to prepare our state agencies for that expansion. I do believe this is a bipartisan issue. It's impacting rural communities, it's impacting urban communities. Healthcare is something that we should all be concerned about. At the point that you hear Marjorie Taylor Greene discussing health care, you know that there's an opportunity for buy-in across this state from legislators across this state. It has been a failure on the part of the state, on the part of Republicans in this state, and it needs to be fixed immediately.
Thank you all for those answers. Our next question comes on the topic of data centers, and in particular, data center development. It has become a major focal point at the state capitol and communities all across our state. CNBC reports that Maine, the state of Maine, is on track to pass a data center moratorium banning their construction in the state until November of 2027. Mr. Duncan, the first answer goes to you. Would you support the adoption of the same thing here in Georgia, a moratorium on new data center development?
We get asked this question just about every stop that we go to around data centers, and different communities have different answers. Some want to embrace them because it's a huge economic tailwind for their schools, for their streets, for their civic setups and infrastructure. Some are vehemently against them. So I think the answer lies in allowing the state legislature, the state government, to force those decisions, to let locals make those decisions. If they want a data center, that's great. Have a data center. If you don't want a data center, then you ought to have the ability to veto the data center. But I also think it expands to making sure that ratepayers aren't shouldering the cost of the infrastructure, the grid, the generation, the transmission lines, making sure Georgia Power and other utilities are able to push those risks and those costs onto the balance sheets of those large corporations that are out there. I also think this is a unique opportunity for us to be innovative in Georgia. Instead of using 15 million gallons of raw water a day, maybe we require them to use closed-loop water systems so that they don't use those precious resources against the community. But at the end of the day, we need local control, innovation, and making sure that the ratepayers are fairly represented.
Mr. Duncan, a follow-up for you. You point in your answer to local control and local community involvement. Do you think state lawmakers and the governor in particular has any role and should have any role in controlling whether data centers continue to be developed here in Georgia or not?
Yeah, I think there's some tools and resources that we can afford them. Special use permits to require as a precept that if they want to build a data center and the economics are working out well, that they have to use those closed loop water systems, or they can only use a certain amount of noise variance or whatnot. But I also think we got to have transparency in these local communities. A lot of the rub that we hear is county commissions, city councils are passing these data centers across, allowing them to be zoned, and then the community is vehemently against it. We need to make sure those are public conversations and making sure those communities have that discussion.
Ms. Bottoms, the next answer goes to you. Would you support or oppose doing the same thing as Maine and instituting a moratorium on data center development?
I think we moved too fast on data centers. I think in our eagerness to attract them to the state, there were too many unknowns that haven't been conveyed to our communities. There are communities who have supported data centers through their economic development agencies like Columbus, $77 million in property taxes to the city of Columbus. But what I'm hearing directly from people on the ground in Columbus, what they are saying is a message that we are hearing across the state. People are concerned about rising utility costs. They are concerned about the drain on the environment, the impact, the unknown impact. I think that we need to take a pause to assess where we are, to determine the difference between fact and fiction, and then proceed. I think it's irresponsible for us as a state to continue on this path.
When you say pause, just to be clear, are you saying you would support a moratorium on development?
I would support a moratorium, and it means bringing everybody to the table. It means bringing people who are experts in environmental impact. It means bringing utility providers like Georgia Power to the table. It means bringing economic development leaders to the table, but it means bringing the community to the table to have a comprehensive conversation and a deep dive on what these data centers are meaning to our state right now.
Thank you, Ms. Bottoms. Mr. Thurman, the same question to you.
Thank you. What I would do, number one, is respect the sovereignty and the power of local governments, particularly in cities and counties, especially as it relates to land use planning. However, there is a role for the governor and the state. Georgia provided nearly $500 million in tax incentives to data centers. As the governor, number one, we would make sure that those incentives are being reciprocated to the people of Georgia. When you approve a data center, whether it's in rural, urban, or suburban Georgia, the ratepayer statewide is bearing the burden of sometimes providing the power to these centers. This is where I stand on it. Number one, the billionaires who are profiting from the data centers should help and must bear the cost and the burden for building them and for building infrastructure. Number two, we have to protect our natural resources, particularly groundwater. And number three, the owners must invest in building in Georgia the most AI proficient workforce in the world.
Mr. Thurmond, one follow for you, 30 seconds. You said billionaires must bear the cost of this development. How would you enforce that? How would you actually make them bear the cost?
Well, first of all, if we can incentivize people to come, we can set the agreement and the expectation like we do with any other industry who comes to Georgia. We can say as a governor that we would love to have you here, but you're going to have to shoulder your share of the burden. If you can't do that, then you will not have access to the incentives that Georgia could offer.
Thank you all for those responses. It is time now to move on to our closing statements. We're going to begin with you, Mr. Thurmond. You have 30 seconds.
I'm Mike Thurmond. I'm the best qualified person in this race. I've been elected 3 times statewide. I've helped hundreds of thousands of Georgians get back to work. I reduced taxes. I'm tested, I'm proven, and I'm ready to serve the people of this great state. Urban, rural, suburban, you will have an advocate and a seat at the table in the Thurmond administration.
Thank you, Mr. Thurmond. Mr. Duncan, the floor is yours. You have 30 seconds.
As I mentioned, it's been nearly 30 years since a Democrat's been sworn in, and we can come up with all kinds of reasons why, but the reality is you got to win more than the base to be the governor in Georgia. I'm building that coalition big enough of Democrats, independents, and disgusted Republicans. I'm talking about the things that most Georgians are worried about every day, the affordability crisis, the health care crisis, and the Donald Trump crisis. If we can flip this state and become a democratically run state, we can not only improve our direction, but we can improve the direction to the rest of the country. I don't only want to earn your vote, I want to earn your trust. DuncanForGeorgia.com.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. We're going to close with Ms. Bottoms. 30 seconds to you for your closing statement.
I'm at least a 5th-generation Georgian, being able to trace my roots to a plantation in Crawfordville, Georgia. So I know what the challenges and opportunities are in this state. I am a battle-tested leader. I've gone toe-to-toe with the Trump administration and won. I know that we need to focus on issues like affordability, expanding Medicaid in this state, on making access to education something that's available to everyone in this state. It's not just about what you will do, it's about what you have done when given the opportunity. And when given the opportunity to lead, I led on behalf of not just the city of Atlanta, but people across this state. And I am ready to go and fight for all of our communities to make Georgia a better place for our children.
And with that, we want to thank all of our candidates for coming here to 11 Alive tonight. And we hope that our voters, because that is the reason we're doing this, are more informed about their decision come primary day, May 19th. Of course, we want to thank all of you for watching here in Atlanta and all over the state. Zach, primary day is coming up pretty quickly.
It is coming up right around the corner. The primary is on May 19th, but early voting begins even sooner than that. That starts on April 27th. If you're watching your calendar or looking at your watch, that's less than 2 weeks away. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. Stay with us on 11 Alive Plus. Faith and I will be part of our debate post show coming up only moments away. Have a good night.
Interesting that Thurman, did some veiled attacks and shots on Duncan. And Duncan only took maybe sort of one veil, but Thurman was, in terms of aggressive tonight, Thurman was the only one who really stretched out and moved out beyond talking about himself. The others really just kept it to themselves and focused on themselves, rather. But that was an interesting choice. Yeah.
We just finished up an exciting leg on this long race for Georgia's next governor. Cheryl Preheim here with Ron Jones in the 11 Alive Plus Streaming Center. Wow, that was an hour. 1 hour, 3 Democratic candidates, and a dozen or more topics. And I took so many notes. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. We have so much to unpack tonight, especially an hour worth of topics. We're talking about healthcare, public safety, the data centers. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Affordability, top of the list.
Man, that's top of mind, for a lot of folks out there. Zach Merchant and Faith Jesse, they did an outstanding job just trying to orchestrate this entire debate session. We really appreciate that. But it's time to bring in our experts right now. So our Republican strategist is Spiro Amburn, and Fred Hicks is on the Democratic side. So, guys, what did you think about what happened tonight? What were your takeaways?
Fred, why don't you kick us off here?
All righty. So this was a very interesting, I think, good and spirited debate. I think we have a good sense of where each one of the candidates stands on the big issues. I think that Faith and Zach did a great job with that. I thought it was really interesting that CEO Thurman was really the only one of the candidates who decided to be aggressive and attack. He made one direct he took one direct shot at Jeff Duncan, and then the rest he took out, I might count up 3 indirect, sort of soft blows, contrast efforts at Jeff Duncan. I thought he should have been more direct if he was going to go there with it. But I thought that was really, really interesting, and I thought we had a very strong closing. I thought that Mayor Bottoms was very calm, and that she was very cool, and that she just really answered the questions and moved through the debate pretty seamlessly. And it was very clear to me that Jeff Duncan really wanted to establish himself as a, quote, proud Democrat. He used that term many, many times in the debate tonight.
Yeah, Mr. Duncan came right out of the gate in his opening response, making a clear delineation between he and the Trump administration. I think he called President Trump a dictator in that first response. So we can talk more about that. Spiro, I want to get to your response from a Republican analysis. When you're watching, maybe the top thing that stood out to you as we heard more from this field of 3 Democratic gubernatorial candidates.
Yeah, first of all, great job by 11 Alive picking the topics. Zach and Faith did a good job, moderating. I think the topics that were covered certainly were those that are going to be factors not only in this primary cycle, but also in the general. But, I made a few notes, and as I'm watching Jeff Duncan, I'm kind of scratching my eyes thinking, is this the same guy that was, in the State House of Representatives and served 4 years as lieutenant governor? He, as he said, many times, he's a proud Democrat, and was embarrassed to be a Republican, once Donald Trump was elected. And certainly there are those out there who, may think that on the Republican side, but have not, changed parties. But two things that jumped out to me regarding Jeff Duncan, he talked about, the hate crimes bill. As I mentioned earlier, and having worked in the House, I mean, that was, he took credit for passing the hate crimes bill. And, many Republicans that were around at that time, particularly those in the state legislature, remember that it was the House that actually was promoting the hate crimes bill and was instrumental in getting that bill passed. So that's a little bit of revisionist history there. And on abortion, he claims to have a change of heart, pun intended, and, keeps saying he's a proud Democrat. And, I find it interesting that, and we'll see if Democratic voters actually, buy into this, because, Duncan was a major supporter of the 6-week abortion ban, when he was lieutenant governor. And I have a hard time believing that Democrats will ask someone who championed that bill to become the leader of their party in Georgia. But, we'll see. There's a lot of undecided voters out there and people who don't know these candidates. And, I think whether you agree or disagree with what Jeff Duncan had to say tonight, he was very articulate, and I believe that he did a good job of presenting himself and explaining his positions on issues. And I feel like that he probably did take a step forward and separated himself, from the other two tonight.
It's interesting to hear your perspective on that, Spiro. He just said, I would repeal the heartbeat bill. And he talked about moral clarity, I think is how he talked about it when he talked about changing his stance on that. I want to share a portion that stood out to me. I think it was the second question. We started with immigration, then we went to affordability. And when he spoke about affordability, he was playing a little offense, answering the question about why did he switch parties before he was asked outright about it. Let's just play this clip, and I'd love both of your perspectives on it.
Yeah, this affordability crisis is hitting everybody, whether you own a big business or you're living check to check. The affordability crisis is real and tangible in every household. And it comes in different shapes and sizes. One of the big ideas I've come up with is I want to utilize part of the $17 billion rainy day fund that we have in this state. I want to take 10% of that and put it in a jumpstart fund. $1.7 billion worth of discretionary budget for the governor to be able to put that and wrap it around the axle of poverty. One of the reasons why I'm standing here as a proud Democrat is because I got tired of watching Republicans demonize poverty. There's things that you can do as governor. You can better fund the CAPS program that lowers child care costs and allows a single parent to go back to work. You can reinforce affordable housing projects like Mayor Dickens and Mayor Van Johnson in Savannah's projects and lower the price of housing. You can expand Medicaid. There's lots of opportunities, but we need to start investing in individuals, not just giving handouts, but investing. And I think this is an opportunity for us to make an investment in Georgians.
Thank you, Mr.
There was a point where he said the reason he became a Democrat because he was sick of Republicans ignoring poverty. I think he talked about that as well. Fred, let me ask you this. From where the Democrats are sitting, what do you think in terms of maybe ground gained, in terms of gaining trust? If people said, I don't know, he was a lifelong Republican making the switch over, do you feel like Jeff Duncan did a good job of explaining his stance? And is that something you think Democrats are ready to not only be okay with, but embrace enough to cast a vote that direction?
I don't know if Democrats are ready to embrace it and cast a vote, but I think he did everything he could and should do to address the issues. Listen, there's no point in him running away from it. He has a long record, as Spirit pointed out, in the House, and as people have pointed out on this campaign trail, things he did and did not do or speak out against or speak up for when he was lieutenant governor. And so there's no point in denying that or running away from it. All he can do is acknowledge and then talk about what he would do and speak forcefully about it, about what he would do if elected governor. And so I think that that does give him opportunity because people like authenticity. People are very good about giving people a second chance. So I think, yeah, he has an opportunity there. But I was a little surprised to hear Spiro say that he thought that Jeff Duncan took a step forward from the other two candidates. And the feedback I've been getting via text or that I received throughout the debate was that CEO Thurman got better as the debate went on and that people thought that he did really, really well tonight. Again, my takeaway is that whether you're Jeff Duncan or whether you're Keisha Lance Bottoms or whether you're Michael Thurman, each one of them tonight gave people a reason to be comfortable with them. And they did a good job in drawing a contrast with Donald Trump. They didn't focus on Rick Jackson or Burt Jones. They made this about Donald Trump. They nationalized this election, which is something Republicans tend to do. So I thought that was a very interesting and good technique for all three of the Democratic candidates tonight.
Fred, I would love to see your text chain. I bet there's probably so much great information in there. So I'm just thinking like, wow, that'd be fascinating. So Spiro, what's your response to that?
Yeah, if I could add, I think Mr. Thurman did do well. I did not mean to imply that he did not do good. I do feel like Jeff Duncan has the most to potentially gain and sell himself to Democrat voters, and I do feel like he did a good job articulating himself tonight. Agree or disagree with the content of what he had to say. As a Republican, I feel like Mayor Bottoms or former Mayor Bottoms, frankly, did not do that well. I mean, on the question on affordability, the first part of her answer was that suspending the gas tax. And, that's something that's already being done right now by, the Republican governor and has been done in the past. So that certainly was not a creative answer or something that was unique. And I feel like she was pretty weak on that question. So I do feel like Mr. Thurman did well. And, again, Jeff Duncan, I think either one of those two, I think Duncan or Thurman from a Republican standpoint would be a concern in terms of the November election. And I think, Mayor Bottoms' performance tonight just proves that if she's the nominee, I think she's the one that I think Republicans feel most confident about, because I think from her primarily, we just heard the same typical Democratic talking points that, frankly, I think will not play well in November.
Okay, Spiro, so let's get to you, Fred, to talk about that. We've been talking a lot about Mike Thurman, talked about Jeff Duncan. Let's focus on Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. How do you think she actually performed tonight for Democrats, representing Democrats, if she were to get to the point of representing Democrats for that gubernatorial election?
I think she operated probably from with the old adage in mind of do no harm, right? When you do these debates, when Spiro and I both have advised a lot of candidates and office holders over the years, and one of the things you say when you go on TV is, first of all, do no harm, and then if you can score some points, go ahead and do that. But I think she operated pretty solely from that position, to Spiro's point. She didn't take any chances. She didn't take shots at either of the other candidates. And based on her position in the polls, she doesn't really have to. So I think she's left herself a lot of room to speak to Georgians outside of Atlanta, and for people who have concerns about her time and why she only served one term. I thought that, by the way, that was the biggest question that she had to face tonight, was why did you not run for a second term? I thought her answer was okay. I made a note that she really needs a better answer for that. It's the idea I did what was best for me and my family. I can see the other two candidates having fun with that. Because then the question becomes, well, when something happens in Georgia and it comes down to Georgians and your family, are you going to quit on Georgia? So I think she left herself open on that one. So I hope she cleans that up. But overall, I think she operated from an angle of do no harm, and I thought she accomplished that. So she didn't score a lot of points, but she didn't, other than that one answer, she didn't do herself any real damage.
All right, guys, let's, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to
ahead.
say maybe that's the dynamic. You know, when you go in, she was polling in the high 30s, so a pretty big gap in the name recognition there. I think that's such interesting, the strategy even going into a debate like this, especially when you're kind of the front runner by a long shot. But again, when we're talking about the possibility of this being a runoff, because you've got to get 50% plus one, so that conversation, it's kind of like playing two different games, right, guys? Like the first is like the May 19th game, but you've also got to be like building towards November. So I think the strategy's fascinating. And by the way, you guys, at one point I said I feel like I'm watching a football game with great sportsmanship.
Great
it
sportsmanship.
was
civility.
Pretty civil for sure.
Yeah, it really was. Hey guys, we're going to move on now to Mike Thurmond and talk about how he did tonight. He's the senior candidate, obviously, at 72 years old. However, long-time DeKalb County resident. He's done a lot of things politically, and it seems like he was also reaching out toward the rural community as well by establishing himself as, hey, I was born and raised out there in the rural community. I feel your pain. But when you look at his age, because that was brought up, do you think age is actually a factor? Before you answer that, let's listen to how he responded when that was brought up. Let's listen in.
I think it's time for new vision, new leadership, and new direction. I'm proud to be the one candidate in this race, Republican or Democrat, who has a track record of success. When people are hungry, when we were passing out boxes of food in DeKalb County, at Hosea Feed the Hungry, when SNAP benefits were taken away, just 2 weeks ago when the TSA workers had been without a paycheck for nearly 2 months, no one asked me what my age was or anything about how long I'd served. They were just saying, thank you for helping us at a time of need. I promise you this, Zach, when we expand Medicaid and all of a sudden people who hadn't had access to health care will now be able to go to a doctor, they won't care how long I've been in office. When we finally bring jobs to rural Georgia, when rural Georgia finally gets a seat at the table, when we finally fund education so that every child will have access to a quality education, no one will ask how long I've been there. They'll just say, thank you for the work that you've done. I have a track record. I'm proud of it. It's not about promises, it's performance.
All right, Spiro, so let's talk about that. You know, I'm a baby boomer. I must be very transparent with you. Not quite 72 years old, haven't made that mark, but do you think that he will have an issue possibly reaching a younger generation, reaching the millennials, the Gen Xers, those voters out there? What are your thoughts?
You know, first of all, I will say that was a very good answer. I think that was one of his better answers of the evening, if not the best answer. You know, you can't run from your age, no matter who you are. So I think, you know, you have to own that, and I think he knocked it out of the park on that answer. You know, it's all about having a vision and, you know, being able to articulate that, and, you know, time will tell if he's able to attract, you know, younger voters. It would, you know, age is an issue. But again, if the candidates are able to transcend that and articulate a vision, I mean, we see it at every level, you know, even at the presidential level, you know, certainly, you know, whether it's Biden or Trump, I mean, either one of those have fended off candidates, you know, 20, 30 years younger. So, you know, I do think that age is a factor, but I think it's more important that the candidates articulate their vision. And certainly, you know, Mike Thurmond, somebody who has been around a long time, has a lot of experience, and I think he knows how to sell that to the voters.
You know, Fred, I want to bring you in really quick as we talk about former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. I think as we talked before the debate, you both talked about one hurdle that she would have to clear is really being able to move the conversation away from not like city of Atlanta or, you know, the 5-county metro, but really thinking about a statewide message. Let's listen to how she answered the question about how would she represent not just Atlanta, but Georgia. Let's talk more about how you feel she did in terms of selling that point.
Yeah, Atlanta may be the capital city, but it certainly is not the only city. It's not the only community. That's the reason I've been to Augusta and Richmond County multiple times to hear directly from people, and that is what I will do, God willing, when I am elected governor. I will be there listening to people as I have when I have heard them express concerns about affordability, concerns about access to health care, concerns about quality education in our communities. Nothing beats getting on the ground. I like to say fondly, the streets don't lie. And when you are talking to people directly, you know what matters to them in their communities. While our needs may be similar, they are often community specific. And I will continue to work on behalf of all of Georgia, spending my time outside of the metro area, listening to people across this state.
Ms. Bottoms, one follow-up for you. This will be 30 seconds. You talk about having the conversations across the state. What specifically would you do to turn those conversations into actual policy?
Well, it's actually helped shape our policy. When I launched our campaign for governor, I had a list of priorities, but as I have moved around the state listening to people, it's helped expand it, including creating a pathway for free technical and community college. I've talked about expanding Medicaid and the specific needs of communities in terms of access to health care in those specific communities. So my list of priorities has gone probably from around 4 or 5 to a list of at least 10, just based on what I've heard as I've moved around the state.
Thank you, Ms. Bottoms.
What do you think, Fred? I think, in her closing, we should also say she talked about being a fifth generation Georgian, and also talked during the course of the debate that because she was a senior advisor for the Biden administration, she was acting on behalf of the whole state. So she used that as maybe drawing a line to more of a statewide experience. How'd you feel about all that?
Well, I think there's a data reason for her making that argument, and that is that about 60 to 64% of the electorate is concentrated in Metro, but that leaves about 36%, or more than a third of the Democratic electorate that's outside the metropolitan Atlanta region. And so if she's going to win without a runoff, or even win in a runoff, she's gonna have to find a way to appeal to rural Georgia. And listen, I'm from Southwest Georgia, down there in Early County, and served by our Columbus affiliate. And the needs that we have down there are very, very different than the needs we have up here in Atlanta. And so for Southwest Georgia, or even Southeast Georgia, rural Georgia overall, to get behind someone, they're going to need a candidate who spends time there and who takes the time to understand that when Atlanta sneezes, rural Georgia catches the flu, and we need someone who's going to tend to our issues.
For the debate, Ron, we were talking about this. The highest number in polling was actually the percentages of undecideds. 38% polled were undecided. So, Spiro and Fred, I want your take on this. When we talk about those independent, undecided voters, who do you all think did the best job of speaking to that critical group? Fred, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Fred.
Sorry.
So I think that CEO Thurmond did that. So although he is the oldest candidate in the field, he really leaned upon his experience, talking about when he was de facto commissioner, labor commissioner, and he articulated a very specific set of policy plans and prescriptions for the issues that Georgians are facing. And so people are undecided at this point because while they might prefer someone who's younger, they want someone who's going to be able to tackle the affordability issues and fix the huge problems that the Trump administration has created for Georgia.
I would say that Jeff Duncan did, but that Thurmond was a very close second. I mean, I think they both performed very well, and I think as far as the appeal to the rest of the state, I mean, I think areas around the state, our other cities, Savannah, Augusta, Columbus, Macon, they're all experiencing tremendous growth. And, those are areas I think that are going to be critical in deciding, who wins this nomination. Jeff Duncan did talk about, as far as rural health care, his championing of the rural health tax credit, when he was in the state house as a Republican, mind you, ironically. But, he did talk about that, which is true, and it has had a tremendous impact, in those areas. So I think from that standpoint, that has an appeal both in the rural areas and in the other cities outside the Atlanta region.
And it was interesting, Spiro, in my notes I was talking about when Jeff Duncan actually said independence. I mean, there was a moment where he just said independence, and I think he also said disgusted Republicans. I said, oh, there it is. There's somebody speaking directly to that group of voters.
So I want to ask both of you guys, when you're listening to the debate for the entire hour, and there's so many topics that they covered, is there one thing that stood out the most to you? We'll begin with you first, Fred.
That's a great question. I want to piggyback really on what you just said, and that is that Jeff Duncan made a direct appeal to disaffected Republicans, Democrats who want something and someone different, and he addressed the issues surrounding him head on. Listen, he's been asked a million times on the campaign trail about his change of heart, and is he a true Democrat? Is he a proud Democrat? And so I think he's taken all of that feedback and all the questions he's received on the trail thus far, and he brought it together fairly nicely today. So that's one. The other thing to me was that, again, that CEO Thurman decided to do direct and indirect attacks on Jeff Duncan. So that tells me that in whatever internal polling the Thurman campaign is doing, they see this as a race between himself and Jeff Duncan for second place. And I think that's the reason why we saw him be more aggressive tonight. So that was interesting to me from a strategy perspective.
What did you see? Was there a moment that stood out to you, or a collective moments? All right, looks like we're...
I'm sorry. Did you pitch it to me?
Yeah, I pitched it to you. Is there a moment that stood out to you tonight during this debate?
A moment, I don't know that I would point to a particular moment, but in sort of answering, your question about what stood out, I mean, I think that Jeff Duncan, had the most to potentially gain here because he's the new kid on the block. I do think Thurman performed well, and he's already got an established Democratic base. I think Duncan had the most to gain or potentially kind of fall out entirely. I think he did very well at articulating himself. I'm not saying I agree with everything he had to say, but just generally speaking, I feel like he articulated himself well. And he did try to reach out to those, whatever, independent voters, or as he said, disgruntled Republican voters. So perhaps that's the moment that sticks out the most to me when he, as you mentioned, when he made a direct appeal to those voters who may not normally show up to vote in a Democratic primary, to try to appeal to those voters.
Spiro, just to piggyback on that, it's really interesting, your perspective, because when Duncan was talking, a lot of times he made inferences to, like, I know how the other side works, essentially. Yeah. At one point, I think he said, I've been behind enemy lines when he was talking about repealing the heartbeat bill. And he said, hey, by the way, they don't have the votes to stop it. So kind of talking about, like, hey, I've seen behind the curtain and I can build coalitions and bridges because of that. From where you're sitting in terms of a Republican strategist, were there, maybe thoughts or directions that you take away that you think will be had in terms of conversations on the other side, Republicans who hear what happened tonight and think, like, what does our strategy need to be in response to where we see this going?
Yeah, I think what I would have to say to that is, if it's Thurman or Bottoms who's the nominee, you're going to have a more traditional R versus D, fight in November. If it's Duncan, that's the wild card. I mean, you don't really know how that's going to play in a general election because, as he said, he was a Republican for so long, and he knows how Republicans think and the Republican leadership at the state capitol. So I believe that will be a formidable task on the Republican side to take on in November, regardless of who the Republican nominee is.
Mm-hmm. Spiro, Fred, we cannot thank you enough. Your insight is fantastic. You're such great friends to the Georgia Vote. I'm a fan of all of you on the Georgia Vote. Big fan of Faith and Zach. They showed again tonight that they are so superb at what they do. So thank you for your time, for your insight. We really appreciate it and look forward to talking to you more as we get close to early voting and the primary.
all
And
the things.
here we go, full speed ahead to November.
Yeah, here we go. We really appreciate
Thank you
it,
for having
guys.
us on.
Absolutely. So we'll see you next time as we get closer to the next one. But we're going to bring in Zach Merchant and Faith Jesse right now, the co-anchors of the Georgia Vote. First of all, let me just say, you guys did an outstanding job today, moderating, kind of keeping things moving, asking those very compelling questions. We appreciate that.
Oh, thank you, Ron.
We appreciate that, guys. And we appreciate Fred and Spiro being on as well, because I want to echo what you guys said about them. Their insight is always appreciated.
It is really good, and it's a tough act to follow, but we're going to try here.
We're going to do our best.
I will also say we have to give credit to our colleagues all around Georgia, because we have to continue to remind those here in Atlanta Georgia's much bigger than Atlanta, right? So these candidates, they are trying to appeal not only to us, of course, in the big city, the capital, but all around, especially in rural Georgia. I mean, the questions about the hospitals, about data centers, about farming. I mean, those are issues that a lot of people outside of Atlanta are really, that really impact their lives quite a bit. So we just want to make sure that we are giving our flowers to our colleagues down in Savannah, Augusta, Macon, and elsewhere.
And Columbus. Who broadcast that debate live on their air, shared questions, and a great opportunity for everybody across the state to hear the candidates answer questions that are really specific to them.
That's right.
Yeah, I thought one, you did such a great job, y'all, of just moving it through. I mean, I went old school. I started typing, and then I was like, oh, I'm going old school, and I just was filling up page after page of notes. But I thought was so great, as sometimes in debates, it's as much bickering and back and forth as it is answering the questions, and the amount of ground covered in terms of all of the different topics was really impressive. And what you all were saying, I think, is so key, because the messaging, not just to the core 5 counties, but to each corner of Georgia is so important, because in a statewide race, as the Democrats know, it's a game of margins, and you've got to pull, whatever dozens of votes from even those red counties to really, make a move. Do you feel like there was a standout from where you're sitting, either of you?
What do you think, Faith?
It's a tough question to ask. I think, well, how I will answer that, Cheryl, is I think that each candidate came here prepared to try and stand out, to try and, as you look at the polls, we've talked about it. Of course, former Mayor Bottoms, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has continually been at the top of the polls. Analysts, like you just spoke to, both Spiro and Fred, agree that this contest could go to a runoff. And right now, all of the candidates, including the candidates that you did not see on that stage, many of them are trying to compete for second place. A lot of people believe that she's going to come out on top of that. They believe it's going to go to a runoff, and these candidates are going to try to compete for second place. So what I thought that each candidate, specifically her included, did a good job of trying to position themselves and align themselves to the voter to say, hey, this is why I'm the best choice. Sure, I share these democratic values, but here are my policies. Each candidate was extremely policy focused, policy driven. They were specific in laying out what they wanted to do.
They were, and to pull the curtain back 1 degree here, when we were getting ready for something like this, you always want to err on the side of being more prepared than underprepared. We had a long list of questions that we worked up together.
And follow-ups.
And those come right on the spot. But you never know how much of the way through that list of questions you're going to be able to get to, because you only have this 60-minute window.
Right.
And typically, things slow down when the answers are harder to get a clear answer on. And what we found tonight is we covered a lot of ground. To circle back to the main question here, was there a standout moment? Ron, you pointed out before we joined you, and I think it was so important, it was something we were talking about earlier, there's a lot of talk about polling. The number one poll winner, if you want to call it that, of the most recent public nonpartisan poll was undecided.
Yep.
Most of the electorate still doesn't know.
Yeah.
And this was an opportunity for people in Atlanta and all across the state to hear these folks really dig into some policy questions that have big impact on their lives. I mean, you just, as we kind of got to the end of the debate, data centers, we've seen it here in Metro Atlanta, but folks all across the state have seen these community meetings, these planning and zoning meetings, big crowds and big emotions, really passionate on both sides. Should we bring a data center here or not? We got to see a clean answer on that from the candidates.
You know what I found interesting too, because we've been talking about how Keisha Lance Bottoms is the front runner here among those three candidates. Mike Thurmond right behind her, you know, I guess we're assuming right now, and I know you guys are very objective in how you viewed what took place tonight. Do you think that Keisha Lance Bottoms lost any ground from being the front runner? Because Jeff Duncan was coming at her really hard and really trying to appeal to the independents, trying to appeal to those Republicans that he says that are fed up with Trump and trying to bring them over there. Do you think that she lost any ground at all based upon what you observed tonight?
I'll answer that question in just a moment. I do want to just point one thing out when we talk about sort of the stack of polling. If you go off this Emerson poll, the latest public nonpartisan poll, it had former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms in the lead. Then it had Jeff Duncan in second place with about 13% support, and then Mike Thurmond at about 7.4%. As far as the question goes, you know, I think honestly that's the question that voters have to answer. I don't want to seem like I'm punting on that question by any means, but that's ultimately going to be up to the voters. And I would suspect, tell me if you think I'm wrong about this, but you know, there is a core Democratic group of counties, the major counties here in the metro, but then there are other Democratic strongholds all across the state, and you've got this rural patchwork in between, and different issues impact each one of those communities differently. So the answer in one part of the state may be different than an answer in another.
It brings me to mind, and our producer Reams, I believe, has this question queued up when we asked Mayor Bottoms about her record as mayor. Reams, can we cue that up and play that?
Yeah.
I was very proud of my time as mayor of Atlanta. In fact, when I left the mayor's office, my approval rating was at 68%, which is incredibly high. I left $180 million in the bank, 4 years of balanced budgets, no property tax increases. I created a child savings account for all public kindergartners across our state. I also created a citywide affordable housing program citywide. So I was very proud of my service. But at that time, I made the decision based on what was best for me personally and for my family. I had the opportunity after I completed my 4-year term as mayor, I had the opportunity to serve in the White House. In fact, I'd been asked 3 times by President Biden to join the White House, and I didn't do it because I was committed to completing my term as mayor. I had an opportunity to go to the Biden White House and work and advocate on behalf of all Georgians.
One follow-up for you, Mayor Bottoms. Why not run for a second term? Did you have your eyes set on a Biden White House?
Absolutely not. If I'd had my eyes set on the Biden White House, I would have taken the opportunity to join his cabinet as I had been asked to do. I made a decision based on what was best for my family. My kids were very young at that time. And again, very proud of that decision, very proud of the term that I completed. I left the mayor's office with my head held very high, and I don't regret not serving a second term. Having the opportunity to later serve in the Biden White House and make sure that I could advocate on behalf of all Georgians was a privilege, and I'm very proud of that work.
And so just to remind our viewers, that question was surrounding her term as Atlanta mayor from 2018 to 2022, asking her about the critics that accused her of leaving the city behind at a pivotal time. You remember during that time, it was COVID-19. We saw the George Floyd movement. We saw heightened crime in Atlanta. And so we were asking her about her response to that criticism. And she answered the question. She has been asked this question in certain ways on the campaign trail, but we wanted to ask her about her specific response to that criticism. Something I will tell you all I'm surprised about. I thought that this was a moment that either Jeff Duncan or Mike Thurmond could have come to Ms. Bottoms face to face and addressed her on that. If you, when I believe we would have gone to Mr. Thurmond next or Mr. Duncan after that question, I'm surprised that those candidates didn't take that opportunity to really come for Mayor Bottoms and try to hold her accountable for how she ran the city of Atlanta. This is something very different in this Democratic contest than what we're seeing play out on the Republican side. It seems like shots are being fired left and right when it comes to the Republicans, but the Democrats are playing pretty safe. If you go to 11alive.com just last week, I kind of pressed Mr. Thurmond about Ms. Bottoms' leadership in Atlanta. I asked him 3 times, what did she get wrong? He did not answer the question there. So it's interesting to me that the candidates opted to kind of leave this alone.
Yeah, that really stood out to me, Faith and Zach, through the entirety of the debate, specifically in that moment, because you're right. We were sitting here saying there's the opening, right? But there was such civility across the board throughout the hour. And I think Spiro and Fred were kind of alluding to maybe just a slight nudge at best. And it's very counter to even what we're seeing on your TV right now when you see on the Republican side in the candidates, even Burt Jones and Jackson, really strong, hard going at each other in those ads. So the tone tonight definitely stood out. But to your point, it also allowed a lot more kind of meaty conversation about policies and what could happen and what they say they would do if they were in that seat.
You know, the other thing too is one thing to say things in a commercial. It's another thing to say it to somebody who's right next to you in the room.
Right.
And it sounds cliche, but and that's not certainly not a swipe or an aspersion at anybody. No. Just the fact that to actually be there live in person, face to face, and deliver potentially really scathing criticism if that's the angle you want to take. Sometimes when you're in the room together, it goes that way quickly. Sometimes when you're in the room together, there's a little bit of a ratcheting down. And I think that's what we saw tonight for sure. I mean, we heard Spiro and Fred pointing to that as well. And look, civility is good. We want to talk about policy. We want to make sure that you're hearing answers to stuff that really impacts your life, because politicians bickering, that's a story as old as time. But we did see some. Ron, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and we do hear that all the time. The civility part was amazing. It was just really nice for them to stick with the subject matters. But it seemed like they were focused on their talking points. Regardless of what you guys would ask them, it seems like they were ready for it, but they focused more on their talking points. And it could be because of the time constraints. They had, a minute to be able to respond to your questions, 30 seconds, and then 15 seconds to rebuttal or whatever. So maybe part of that civility was staying within that time frame that kept it that way. What are your thoughts?
That's a good way to look at it, because you're right. There was a limited amount of time. I believe that the candidates are playing nice. I think the test will come if this goes to a runoff. Are these candidates still playing nice at that point?
Yeah, and as we've seen, it's a big field, right? Yeah. It is likely everybody who's been following this race, including essentially every one of the candidates, and we've talked to them all, has said this is probably, almost certainly going to a runoff. So that's the state of play here. We did see, perhaps relatedly, a couple moments where Mr. Thurmond and Mr. Duncan, I don't want to say, took swipes at each other necessarily, but they pushed back on some of the claims that their opponent was making. There was one point on the question about safety, coming from Chuck Williams, one of our partner station reporters. What would you do to curb violent crime, curb gang-related crime? And Mr. Thurmond began his answer by pointing at a policy that was enacted into Georgia law when Jeff Duncan was the Republican lieutenant governor. That was the so-called constitutional carry law that, broadly speaking, really expanded the access to firearms and expanded where you can carry firearms. Mr. Duncan responded, and he's, as he has in the past, he kind of repudiated his past stance, but you saw that line of division come out there.
Another thing that stood out to me, Faith and Zach, was when Thurmond was talking about the heartbeat bill, and he said, hey, the other thing we're not talking about is the lives that have already been lost. And then he said something to the effect of, and anyone who's played a part in the passage of that bill has that burden to bear. And you knew where that was being directed in the room, and that was also to Jeff Duncan. Now, when we're talking about fiery moments, I think to myself, the most fire I felt was when Jeff Duncan talked about President Trump. Yeah. I heard phrases like MAGA puppets, dictator, those kind of things. That was fiery, and there was a little bit of that even when he was kind of giving his stance on why he changed his mind about the heartbeat bill and what he would do if he were governor. Let's listen in on that exchange.
Certainly, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's got to be repealed. I think millions of Georgia women want us to do that. I think a majority of Georgians want us to repeal the 6-week ban. And I think a majority of the legislature does too. Republicans don't have the votes to stop it. I think we need to figure out the best way to get it into committee, out of committee, onto the House and Senate floors, and get it to the governor's desk. But also the importance of signing the executive order immediately that clarifies doctors can practice medicine without fear of prosecution. And look, like I said, this is a moral clarity issue that allowed me to understand these deeply complicated issues, these horrific outcomes that came as a result of the passage of the heartbeat bill. And I was wrong as the lieutenant governor, the president of the Senate, to think that room full of state legislators knew better than millions of women, because they don't. And a two-dimensional piece of paper will never represent the needs or the issues that are brought forward, and quite honestly is what a woman's toughest decision. And a legislator who's never met or never will meet that woman should not be making the most important decision in that woman's life.
And one follow-up for you, Mr. Duncan. I mean, you just mentioned it, and you have mentioned it several times on the campaign trail. You were one of the original people who was behind the heartbeat bill. How would you accomplish that with a GOP-controlled legislature?
I think, once again, this is an issue that I've been kind of behind enemy lines on. I know the state legislators that aren't supportive of it, and they don't have the political cover. They don't have the political courage to stand up. And look, if they want to blame somebody, they can blame me to get up and do the right thing. I think the same thing follows on guns. I think the same thing's on public education. And the issues go on and on and on. Look, these folks have followed Donald Trump off a cliff, and they're ready for an exit. And if they want to be proud Democrats with me, the more the merrier.
So that was another example, Faith and Zach, of him making that clear delineation where he is not anywhere supportive of President Trump, and he really started the night that way and ended the night that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to remind voters, I mean, you do look at the history of Jeff Duncan for the last couple of years since, 2020, since all the debacle between the phone call and everything. That's kind of when you saw this distancing, I would say, from the Republican Party with Mr. Duncan. Some people might have a take on that timeline, but he did campaign with Vice President Kamala Harris. He was at the DNC, then he eventually, switching parties to become a Democrat. But I think what Mr. Duncan is going against, and I think that his whole team admits that, is this believability factor. That's why one of my follow-ups to another question I asked was, what do you have to say to critics who say you're just switching parties because you might have a better job or a better chance at becoming governor on the Democratic side? And so that is something that Mr. Duncan is going to have to try and prove. But he also says something else, Zach, Cheryl, and Ron, that he is not just trying to speak to Democrats. He's really going after those independents and what he calls disgusted Republicans who are also not happy with Donald Trump. He's saying, hey, I used to think like you. I still kind of think like you on certain policies, on certain things. Come on over. It's much better here. I'm going to show you why I'm your guy for this job.
And that is a nod towards the reality kind of looming behind this entire conversation. We're talking, rightly so, about the primary. It's right around the corner. It's less than 5 weeks away.
An open primary, by the way.
Indeed. And so in Georgia, you can have people coming into you get to choose what ballot you get here in Georgia.
You don't have to be Democrat or Republican to vote.
But after this comes the general election. And that is, in many ways, a brand new state of play. The primary battles in any race, and particularly in a closely divided political state like ours, tend to take on one kind of tenor. And then once the nominees emerge, it tends to take on a very different flavor of candidate and campaign and rhetoric when you're trying to speak to that broader audience. And you see folks like Jeff Duncan, and at points throughout the debate, Mr. Thurmond and Ms. Bottoms, all trying to speak to the primary electorate, the reliable Democratic base voter, and at other times making nods towards a general electorate that is a much broader pool of potential supporters.
And those undecided voters could move the scale here, even in the primary. Once again, like to remind you all, Zach brought it up earlier, the undecided, according to the poll that we referenced, the nonpartisan Next Star Emerson poll, the undecided voter was the winner of that poll, even over former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. So I think that these candidates do have that in mind. It's how do they convince people in the next month or so.
And it really is almost just a month
it's the
now. It's
15th,
coming
so we have a
really
month and
quickly.
4 days to get out there, and it's not just about, hey, picking my name. It's about that that motivation to even get up and vote. It's not a presidential election year. This is a midterm year. Obviously, it's a little different. A lot of money is being spent, but most people that are not us deep into politics are not thinking about this right now. They're thinking about it's spring and spring break, and I want to get out to the beach.
And then, Cheryl, go ahead.
You make a really good point, because it is really who can get people to show up and cast the ballot. Yeah.
That excitement.
And you know what, guys, I had an opportunity to go out there in Metro Atlanta. I was speaking with a lot of voters just to try to get their opinion. And we had talked about this during the pre-show. And so I was asking them, what would they say to Democrats? What would they say to Republicans? What would they say to these candidates if they were in that debate room? And the one thing that stood out, number one, was crime and cost of living, those two things. But later on, some of them talked about, you know, they want them to be authentic and original. They don't want to just have them talk the talk, but they wanted them to walk the walk. Whatever they're promising, they want them to fulfill it. Let's listen into what some of them had to say.
Honesty is a good start.
To be accountable. No BS. You know, be real. Yeah. People are hurting.
Not just lip service.
I think also safety.
Something about the violence that's just overshadowing, not only globally, but, you know, here recently in Atlanta.
How they're going to make living better for us here in Georgia, you know? Everything's high, the cost of living is high, and just to live a decent life is unsustainable.
This is not the time to, you know, think about themselves and their own political career.
What are they going to bring to the table to make that change happen? Because we need it right now.
What are they going to do to make that change happen, because we need it right now, is what I heard a lot of times when I was out there on the street is, you know, listen, I know that you're making a bunch of promises because you're politicians, but don't just be political, but be active and deliver on whatever you're promising.
And you have to think about the frustration, because while this is a statewide race, it's hanging in the shadow of what we are seeing on the federal level, right? With Congress that can't get it together, leading to long TSA lines, leading to foreign policy, leading to higher gas prices, things that the governor doesn't necessarily have weight on, but things that will impact Georgia. So I think that that's also in the back of people's minds. What you're seeing on TV every day right now is a lot that's happening in Washington. How can the governor come in and make life better for me?
The governor, who, by the way, is almost always the lead point person in liaising between the state and the federal government. So whoever is elected to this position takes on not just the job, the top job in our state, but also the top job in working with the federal government on issues like this, but also on things like disaster relief. We unfortunately have seen severe weather. We've seen hurricanes. We've seen tornadoes. Whenever federal involvement becomes a factor, the governor and the governor's office plays almost always a really critical part in making sure all of that plays out as it is supposed to. So to sum it up, it is as important a job as anybody can have in our state.
You know, Zach, it's interesting when you were talking about that, because I thought they did a good job of also educating the voters a little bit too, to say, hey, a lot of times there's a lot of conversation about the federal money that comes or does not come, but they were also kind of educating about what money is available and the power of a governor with that massive budget and where does that money go. And they spoke very specifically about that, maybe more so than in terms of anything when it came to Medicaid, about where would they move money around, so that they were saying there could be policy changes. And I know, Faith, you and Zach both asked some specific questions like, okay, that's your idea, when might that be implemented? And Mr. Thurman, for one, at one point said within a year, you know, just talking about here was the idea and here's the timeline for a possible solution, but even learning a little bit more about how the money works. And Medicaid obviously was a big conversation, and that's been a clear delineation between the Democrats and the Republicans in this state, and healthcare, a big topic. And I thought you both did a wonderful job of presenting that and just hearing what they had to say about what might that look under an administration that they would be in charge of.
Yeah.
One of the factors too, and that's very kind of you, Cheryl, so thank you. One of the factors too that's looming here is that it's no secret right now Republicans control the governor's mansion, and so we're totally synergized here. It's no secret. Governor Brian Kemp, he controls the governor's mansion. Republicans control the state Senate, and they control the state House. They have a full lock on the bill and law making process here in our state. If the governor's mansion goes to a Republican, Republicans continue to control the governor's mansion. If it flips, you may end up in a situation where you have a Democratic governor trying to work with, maybe work against, depending on the issue at play, a Republican-controlled state legislature. We haven't seen that in Georgia in quite some time, but that's a factor to remember about. And a question we're going to keep asking is, you have these policy proposals, you want to get them done, you have some specifics about how you're going to get the money, where it's going to come from.
How do you do that?
How are you going to convince potentially a state legislature that is not at all potentially interested in giving you the political wins that you're looking for?
They're simply just going to have different power. It takes me back to the last legislative session with tort reform, or depending on what you call it. And that was Governor Brian Kemp's signature piece of legislation, going as far as, I believe Cody Hall was on a morning show, echoing the governor's message, saying, if you all do not pass this, we will have a special session until it gets passed. He could do that because of what Zach just said. If a Mike
and
Thurmond,
those were all Republicans talking to each other.
And those were all Republicans because there was still a little bit of a, divide there. They eventually passed it. If it's a Mike Thurmond, a Jeff Duncan, Miss Bottoms, and she goes in and says that, Republicans will be like, okay, what's she gonna do? Now there is a slimming majority, but will we see the House and Senate flip on the state level this midterm year? That's not likely. There could be some seats lost on each way, but that's why we continue to pose this question: is how would you get that done? You don't have that same power that Governor Kemp had, and because of that power of Governor Kemp, he's his 8 years, I mean, he has a long list of things that he was able to accomplish, a lot of campaign promises that he was able to keep.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's such an important point, and why Jeff Duncan kept saying, like, hey, I know people on both sides. I can bring people to the table. So all fascinating. I really feel like they being the voters really were able to get a lot of information tonight, and we'll see if some of those undecideds get a little closer to decided after a night like tonight.
I tell you what, guys, we unpacked a lot tonight, and of course you guys were a big part of that. Zach and Faith, we really appreciate all that you've done. This is my first time in the streaming center, sitting alongside with Cheryl Preheim, and this has been a blast as well as we kind of navigate through this election cycle. And we really appreciate all of you who are watching us here on 11 Alive Plus. And if I could put in a plug, watch us tonight on 11 Alive News at 11 as well. That's coming up. We'll have all your news, weather, and sports too.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. Appreciate wherever you're watching in the state of Georgia and beyond. Much more to talk about ahead as we come closer to a primary in May and the general election in November. We'll have it all covered for you here on 11 Alive Plus.